insane.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric on our long-running series, The Unported Playlist, where I take a look at some of my favorite unported arcade games of all time. And today we're taking a look at Spider-Man the video game, released by Sega and running on the System 32 hardware. And this is an iconic beat-em-up that's also an action platformer, because pretty much if you walked into an arcade in the early 90s, you were going to see this cabinet on the floor. And it's probably still going to be a relatively common game because this was a hit for Sega, and Spider-Man being such a huge character back in the day, pretty much every kid knew this cabinet when they looked at it was going to be good because it had both Spider-Man and Sega on the artwork, and you knew that if you saw a Sega game back in the early 90s, you were probably in for a treat. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like, subscribe, that notification bell, or else you're going to end up like that guy there. And if you want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well, because Venom's a member, why aren't you? No, honestly, you can or you can't, it doesn't really matter to me. But I absolutely love this game. It's such an iconic beat 'em up, and this is another game that I played to death in the arcades. I remember just asking my father if I could have just a few more quarters to see the ending, and honestly 9 out of 10 times he was nice and gave me as much money as I needed to beat a game. If I didn't see the ending, it's because I didn't like the game enough to check it out. But you'll see right here the big hook of Spider-Man, the video game, is that it actually changes up its gameplay style. We went from a, kind of belt-scrolling beat-em-up game to more of an action platform, because this is hit the enemy once and they die. And I love the ability of the Sega System 32 arcade board to really kind of make those sprites move around. The scaling is incredible, and when everything recedes into the background and the scope of the game becomes much larger, it really is like getting two games in one. And Venom here, as we destroy him as he's huge, it is just a ton of fun. I remember this level like the back of my hand, and maybe that's because I beat the game once, but maybe I played it a bunch of times before I decided I really did want to beat it, because when you're a kid and you only have so many quarters, you really got to make that choice for yourself. But even as this big helicopter comes in and drops you back off into the next area, and the screen is going to scale back in and become a beat 'em up, it's just such a unique and interesting look. And I'm really surprised this didn't get ported to something like 32X, because the Sega Genesis couldn't handle this, but this seems like the type of game that the 32X was made to play. Maybe it's just a licensing thing, maybe Sega couldn't legally release it for the home market, but I would have assumed if they could have, it would have come over to something like the 32X or even maybe the Saturn, because even though people really liked 3D games then, superheroes really still did have a big draw, and I would have thought that they would have really pushed to bring this to as many platforms as possible, but who knows, maybe they just didn't have the license. And that's why I would highly assume you will never see this game ported around the current time, because think about how big Marvel and Spider-Man were back in the 90s. Now think of how big the Marvel Universe is today. It's probably the highest grossing film franchise of all time by this point in time. I didn't look that up, but I'm guessing it is. If Sega wanted to re-release this game, they would have to pay dearly for the rights to do so, and I'm sure there's an accountant somewhere in Sega in Japan running the numbers and saying, we cannot profit based upon the licensing agreement. And that's just a bummer, and licensing is a reason why a lot of these games never get ported later on, even if they are iconic games of the 90s. But you will see that we're moving around with different characters. I do think this game plays the best as Spider-Man, because it is Spider-Man the video game, and of course there's other characters, but it feels like the game was truly balanced for that one character, and every other character has some sort of slight disadvantage. But I just love these side-scrolling stages right here. I would have played an entire game just like this. But the best part of this game is that right when you feel like you've been playing a little bit too much beat 'em up, the game transitions to the action platform stage, and you get a little bit of a break. And that's always, and I've said it in previous videos, one of my major complaints with beat 'em ups is sometimes they slightly overstay their welcome, and I get a little bit bored with playing them. I never have that issue here with Spider-Man, the arcade game. But I love how this game looks, I love how this game plays, but it also has a spectacular soundtrack. So go ahead and listen for like 45 seconds to a minute, and I'll come back and tell you more about why Spider-Man the arcade game on the System 32 is one of those absolute 90s gems. But enjoy!
Scratch one green goblin.
Just just an absolutely iconic soundtrack, and I love everything about it. But moving on, graphically this game is outstanding. The System 32 from Sega could push a lot of sprites around, that it had excellent scaling capabilities, but the detail in the sprites and all the colors and the gradients, the art team that made this game did a spectacular job as well. And I love these dudes in suits as they throw punches at you. Those suits open up in the wind. They kind of almost look like extras from the Michael Jackson Moonwalker music video, which inconsequently is probably an arcade game I should cover on Unported at some point in time. The only thing that I don't like about this game, and you'll just see there, it said move forward, and it let me go like 3 feet before it stopped me. Every once in a while this game just kind of holds you on the same screen for slightly too long, and you're just saying, come on, you told me I could move. Why did you stop me 5 feet to the right and throw another batch of enemies at me? Obviously it's an artificial way to make the game seem longer, but this game's already really long. I wish Sega had just kind of maybe trimmed like 5 minutes of those extra boss encounters there, enemy encounters. It's just one of those things where I feel like they were trying to slow it down ever so slightly. But with the scaling of the System 32, I love this moment right here. You jump into the Kingpin's office and the screen just scales right in as the Kingpin's behind his desk and he smashes it. The detail in that smash is just spectacular. I love his portrait on the background as well. Kingpin's always been an absolute great villain because he really isn't anything other than a rich guy who can spend a lot of money. He has no real power. If he does, I don't know what it is, so you can leave me a comment down below. It's just always a great character, and his design in this game is perfect with his walking stick as well. If there's one other complaint I would say about Spider-Man the arcade game is every once in a while lining up your shots feels difficult. Not so much with Spider-Man, but with some of the other characters like Hawkeye. Actually getting a punch, and I feel like his character design just makes it really hard to line up. And you will see that we have that web as well there. If you take a look at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you're going to see we have a large life, not bar, but numeric value. And if you shoot that web out, it is going to take a little bit of your life away. But once you get low enough where it would take too much life and kill you, you have an unlimited amount of it. So you can actually spam the fact that you're almost dead to kind of cheese a few of the bosses if you can get them into a stun lock pattern. And I love this here as we jump down onto the helicopter and it flies away into the distance. I will say though, the other small strike I'll give against this game is the Hobgoblin is an annoying boss to fight. Trying to hit him here as he's dropping bombs on you, as these turrets are shooting at you. Sometimes he's too high in the screen or too low to actually get a hit in on him, so you're just going to have to take damage until he gets to an elevation that you're actually able to hit. Again, it just feels like Sega saying, you know what, you played the game long enough, you're going to have to give us a credit here either way because we're going to make it slightly cheap. But I do love that he zooms back in and we finally get that encounter with the Kingpin. It's just so much fun. It's a beat 'em up, it's a side-scrolling action platformer, and I love the texture on this plane as well. It almost has that kind of like printed pattern of a comic book where you can see the ink dots in the actual image itself. I don't know if that was intentional or it just looks like kind of a blending pattern, but it kind of reminds me of a comic book, and for that I think it does an outstanding job. And Kingpin here will just trade a punch with him and he's finally done for, and we can move on to go to Dr. Doom, the last stage in the game, which is honestly like a quarter of the entire game. It's one of the longest stages in a beat 'em up I've ever played. And then we get these enemies here. Maybe you know who they are, I do not, but they're half man, half ape. They're weird. They've got these long arms. When you hit them, they make a monkey noise. It always makes me laugh every time I see it. And I've absolutely no idea what the word Vok means. Clearly it's some sort of thing like pow or thwack from the Batman series, but I've always seen that and been like, VOK, what in the hell does that mean? If you have any ideas, leave me a comment down below. Maybe it's just some random word they made up at Sega when they were developing the game, but I've always been really curious. And I love the fire effect here as well, and you can see that it does have a pseudo-transparency. You can see Spider-Man behind it. I'm not sure if it's more of a dithering thing or a true transparency. It is hard to tell. But again, this is just an absolutely iconic arcade game that 100% should have been brought home to something like the 32X, because that system could have really done it justice, because it wasn't great for 3D, but some of the 2D games, play Spider-Man the 32X game and tell me if it's not absolute garbage. They just should have brought this home instead. I don't know why they didn't. It has got to be licensing, because why would Sega or another developer make a brand new Spider-Man game for the platform if they just could have ported over Spider-Man the arcade game, because this is where it's at as far as early 90s Sega arcade beat 'em ups is concerned. But leave me a comment down below. Have you ever played this game before? Are you into it? The one thing that I don't love so much, and that's just because it's not my interest area, is a lot of the other Marvel stuff here, like Dr. Doom. I know he exists, I know he's a person, but I don't know any of his lore. Spider-Man I've seen a little bit more of, but honestly, Marvel's one of those things, I take it or I leave it. But yeah, if you never played Spider-Man the arcade game before, go ahead and give it a shot, and leave me a comment down below and tell me why not loving Marvel's stupid. See you guys next time. Bye bye.